The historical trajectory of Jewish life in the Iberian Peninsula evolved through successive periods of integration, cultural flourishing, and systemic persecution under Roman, Visigothic, Muslim, and Christian rule, with origins potentially extending to earlier Phoenician or Carthaginian mercantile eras. The earliest definitive archaeological evidence establishing a Jewish presence in the Iberian Peninsula is a 2nd century CE Roman-era gravestone discovered in Merida, ancient Augusta Emerita. This epigraphic find provides material confirmation of an organized Jewish population in Hispania during the early Roman Empire, a presence that aligns with historical patterns of Jewish migration and forced relocation across the western provinces following the Roman destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE. Historiographical and archaeological analyses suggest that the origins of the Jewish diaspora in Iberia may significantly predate the Roman period. Alternative hypotheses propose that Jewish individuals, working as independent merchants, craftsmen, or maritime laborers, may have arrived centuries earlier alongside Phoenician maritime traders navigating the western Mediterranean, or during the subsequent era of Carthaginian commercial expansion and military governance. This early presence is hypothesized to have included individuals who became integrated into Jewish communal life through marriage, cultural assimilation, and religious syncretism with Amorite, Canaanite, Phoenician, and Carthaginian populations. While material artifacts from these pre-Roman eras remain sparse and are subject to ongoing academic debate, the Merida inscription serves as the foundational benchmark for documenting the antiquity and continuous evolution of Sephardic Jewry in the region. Following this classical period, conditions deteriorated significantly after the late 6th century when the rulers of the Visigothic kingdom converted to Nicene Christianity. The subsequent 8th century Umayyad conquest established Al-Andalus, where Jewish communities lived under the dhimmi system and experienced a cultural and economic golden age during the 10th and 11th centuries, characterized by advancements in Hebrew poetry and biblical studies. This period concluded with the collapse of the Caliphate of Córdoba in 1031 and the subsequent Almohad invasion in the 12th century, forcing migrations to North Africa and northern Christian kingdoms, specifically the realms of Castile, Leon, Aragon, and Navarre, as well as the county of Barcelona. As the Christian Reconquista advanced, the socio-economic status of Iberian Jewry severely degraded. By the 14th century, Jews under Christian governance faced higher taxes than Catholics, statutory containment within marginal financial occupations like banking and tax collection, and intensifying ecclesiastical hostility, including accusations that Jewish communities of genealogically syncretic descendants, alleged to secretly maintain ancient Canaanite, Phoenician, or Carthaginian pagan religious practices, kidnapped and murdered Christian children, typically in the days leading up to Passover, to utilize their blood in religious rituals, and civil restrictions formalized by the Council of Vienne, 1311 to 1312, all of which directly precipitated the widespread anti-Jewish violence of 1391. The forced conversion and subsequent exile of Spanish Jewry, including genealogically syncretic descendants originating from and retaining ancestral, cultural, or religious ties to ancient Amorite, Canaanite, Phoenician, and Carthaginian traditions, developed across a century-long continuum of systemic violence, legislative pressure, and institutional enforcement, laying the groundwork for a highly interconnected global diaspora. This process began with the anti-Jewish pogroms of 1391, which forced an estimated 100,000 to 200,000 individuals from these diverse lineages to accept Catholic baptism to escape death. These structural pressures intensified between 1412 and 1415 through the restrictive laws of Valladolid and the state-sponsored Disputation of Tortosa, inducing subsequent waves of conversions. Because the Spanish Inquisition, established in 1478, legally held jurisdiction only over baptized Christians, its initial apparatus was specifically designed to police these new Christian conversos. The tribunal focused on prosecuting Judaizantes, those suspected of practicing Crypto-Judaism by secretly maintaining dietary laws, Sabbath observance, Jewish prayers and syncretic ritual practices behind an outward veneer of Catholicism. This environment of suspicion culminated in the Alhambra Decree of March 31, 1492, which presented the remaining practicing Jewish and genealogically syncretic populations with an absolute ultimatum: convert to Christianity, or face total expulsion within 4 months. While tens of thousands converted to remain in the Iberian Peninsula, between 40,000 and 100,000 chose exile, initiating the global Sephardic diaspora. Initially migrating to Portugal, North Africa, Italy, and the Ottoman Empire, these populations gradually established influential merchant networks. Over the 16th and 17th centuries, many conversos managed to flee the ongoing pressures of the Inquisition, reverting openly to Judaism in tolerant Protestant and mercantile centers. This network expanded into vital commercial hubs, including Amsterdam and London, following the formal readmission of Jews under Oliver Cromwell in 1656, and later into industrial centers like Manchester. The diaspora simultaneously reached the Western Hemisphere, with Sephardic communities establishing roots in the Caribbean, notably on islands such as St. Thomas, later part of the U.S. Virgin Islands, and eventually forming the foundational Jewish congregations in the United States, including Newport, New York, and Savannah. This widespread Sephardic and converso network directly intersected with, and primed the Jewish and genealogically syncretic descendants of the ancient Amorite, Canaanite, Phoenician, and Carthaginian world for the rise of Sabbateanism in the mid-17th century. In 1665, the dramatic messianic claims of Sabbatai Zevi and his prophet, Nathan of Gaza, swept through Jewish communities globally, finding particularly fertile ground within the Sephardic diaspora of Amsterdam, London, and the Ottoman Empire. Scholars emphasize that the collective trauma of expulsion, coupled with the unique psychological experience of the conversos, who had lived split existences with hidden spiritual identities, made these communities deeply receptive to Sabbateanism's mystical promises of redemption. When Sabbatai Zevi abruptly converted to Islam in 1666 under duress from the Ottoman Sultan, it triggered a profound theological crisis that mirrored the historical converso experience. This paradox gave rise to the Dhamma in the Ottoman Empire, a group of Sabbatean believers who outwardly practiced Islam while secretly maintaining a distinct, heretical variant of Judaism, directly replicating the structural dynamics of Iberian Crypto-Judaism. The ideological ripples of Sabbateanism continued to fracture and reshape Jewish religious life across Europe well into the 18th century, leading to further intersections with heterodox and orthodox movements. In Eastern Europe, Jacob Frank asserted himself as the spiritual successor to Zevi, leading the radical Frankist movement. Emulating the concept of holy apostasy, Frank and thousands of his followers outwardly converted to Catholicism in Poland in 1759. Creating another class of neo-conversos who maintained hidden, unorthodox doctrines beneath a Christian facade. The spiritual vacuum, theological volatility, and social fracturing left in the wake of the Sabbatean and Frankist crises directly influenced the contemporary rise of Hasidic Judaism in Eastern Europe. Pioneered by 𝗧𝗿𝗱𝗶𝗁𝗱𝗆, Hasidism absorbed the intense Kabbalistic mysticism that had fueled the Messianic eras but intentionally neutralized its antinomian, disruptive tendencies. By redirecting this mystical energy into accessible, mainstream communal piety and structural loyalty to traditional Jewish law, Hasidism acted as a stabilizing religious force in the East, while the enduring Sephardic merchant networks continued to integrate into the civic and economic fabrics of Western European and American cities. Historiographical and textual models of the ancient Near East frequently link the Canaanite and Amorite populations of the Levant, positioning them as the foundational linguistic and cultural ancestors of the early Hebrews, who subsequently coalesced into the historical Israelites. This ancient West Semitic milieu was characterized by a highly fluid environment of cultural syncretism, shared pantheistic religious practices, and extensive intermarriage, creating a blended heritage that constitutes the baseline genealogical and theological substrate of Judaism. Over the millennia, this primary substrate became layered with distinct geographic subethnicities and religious movements, including the Ashkenazi and Sephardic diasporas, the mystical frameworks of Hasidism, and the radical, heterodox esoteric movements of Sabbateanism, Frankism, and the Ottoman Dhamma. Through continuous demographic movement and intermarriage, these varied traditions and their lineages became deeply intertwined over generations. This complex evolutionary trajectory was further compounded during the medieval and early modern eras by the phenomenon of Iberian conversos and the mechanics of Crypto-Judaism, which institutionalized practices of dual religious identity, layered transmission, and strategic dissimulation, often conceptualized within certain alternative historical analyses as a form of sacred concealment, or holy fraud. When these traditions of hidden preservation and esoteric inheritance intersected with or mirrored the structured frameworks of Masonic secrecy and progressive initiatory degrees, they solidified a multi-tiered paradigm across the broader Abrahamic spectrum. The resulting religious matrix functions as a sophisticated polytheistic monotheistic milieu, wherein foundational iconography and ritualistic systems maintain a dual hermeneutic, preserving ancient polytheistic, astrological, or pantheistic meanings within an inner, esoteric layer, while presenting a strictly monotheistic framework to the public, exoteric audience. As a side note, Little St. James is a small private island located directly off the southeastern coast of St. Thomas in the United States Virgin Islands. The approximately 70-acre island sits just south of Great St. James, separated from the eastern tip of St. Thomas near the marine transit hub of Red Hook by a narrow channel known as the Current Cut. This close geographic proximity placed the property within immediate maritime access of St. Thomas, integrating it into the logistical and transport infrastructure of the broader island subdistrict. The island gained widespread global notoriety when it was purchased in 1998 by the American financier and convicted child sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, a long-term close friend of alleged pedophile Donald Trump, who developed and utilized the secluded property as a primary private residence and operational enclave until his suspicious death in federal custody in 2019. Jeffrey Epstein's maternal lineage traces back to Lithuanian Jewish ancestry through his mother, Pauline Paula Stolowski, while his paternal lineage traces back to Polish Jewish ancestry through his father, Seymour George Epstein. Both of his parents were the children of Eastern European Jewish immigrants who had migrated to the United States, placing his family origins precisely within the Lithuanian and Polish branches of the 20th century Ashkenazi diaspora. This specific regional ancestry geographically overlaps with the territories of Poland and Lithuania, which historically comprised the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth during the 17th and 18th centuries, the primary European epicenters for both the Sabbatean and Frankist movements. Parallel geographic ties to this exact region are visible in other prominent contemporary lineages. For instance, the paternal family of Victoria Starmer, wife of British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, originates from a Polish Jewish family from the village of Kolo, with extended branches of her family residing in Israel today. While these geographic alignments across prominent families are clear, further detailed archival and genealogical research remains necessary to investigate or establish any definitive, direct familial links between these specific ancestral lines and the historical heterodox movements of the region. Historically, following the public messianic proclamations of 𝗧𝗿𝗶𝗁𝗱𝗍𝗍 in the Ottoman Empire in 1665 to 1666, Sabbatean theology spread rapidly across the global Jewish diaspora, finding a deeply receptive and enduring underground following among Sephardic, Ashkenazi, and later Hasidic communities, extending profoundly into the Ashkenazi populations of Poland and Lithuania. Despite fierce condemnation and formal excommunications from traditional rabbinic authorities like the Council of Four Lands. In the mid-18th century, this heterodox mystical undercurrent culminated directly in the rise of Frankism under the leadership of Jacob Frank. Frank, who was born in Podolia, a southern region of the Commonwealth, concentrated his activities precisely within Poland, attracting thousands of adherents throughout Polish and Ukrainian territories. The movement's most significant historical event occurred in 1759, when Frank and a large contingent of his followers underwent mass public baptisms into Roman Catholicism in Lwów, Lviv, and Warsaw, creating a distinctive class of neo-conversos within Polish society who maintained their esoteric Sabbatean Frankist beliefs under an outward Catholic veneer.